All right, if you would take out your bullet or your message outline for today, we are finishing up the book of Jonah. There was a third grade class that was in art, and the art teacher gave this assignment. I want you to think of your favorite story, and I want you to take out your art drawing and put in your favorite picture from that story, and then you're going to color that in, and whatever time we have left, then you're going to have a chance, some of you will have a chance to share your picture and your story. And so the children all began, and as the teacher was looking around, walking and encouraging everybody, she saw one girl that had drawn a huge picture of a whale on her art pad. And she was wondering about that. Well, it couldn't be Moby Dick. I mean, she's only in third grade. And so she asked, now what are you drawing? And Jane said, well, I'm drawing a whale. And what is your story? And she said, well, my story is Jonah and the whale, my favorite story. Now the art teacher was not a Christian, and she was kind of antagonistic towards Christianity. And she said, well, now Jane, you know that it's not possible for a whale to swallow a human being. And she said, oh, yes, it is. And she said, well, I'm sorry to tell you, but no, it's not. And so Jane was kind of perplexed by this, and she said to her teacher, I'll tell you what, when I get to heaven, I'll ask Jonah if that really happened. And by this time, the teacher was a little bit snarky, and she said, well, what if Jonah's not in heaven? What if he's in hell? And Jane said, well, then you can ask him. That's a great story. I wish I'd thought of that myself. Well, we've taken, 2 weeks ago, we looked at sort of an overview of the book of Jonah. Last week, we looked at Jonah chapter 1 and 2. And now we look at Jonah 3 and 4. And Jonah is just one of those strange prophetic books. It's almost like the upside-down book, the upside-down prophecy, the upside-down prophet. It's where the bad guys end up becoming the good guys. And the good guy, ostensibly Jonah, ends up being exposed as he got a long way to go, like you and I do. It's a very, very shocking book to read, very surprising book. But when I think about this book, I think, what are we supposed to learn? Well, there are things that we're supposed to learn about the nature of God. Particularly, probably most importantly, what does God do when we run away from him? When we decide, I'm just going to live the way I want to, and I don't care what you have to say about that. What does God do? And we've looked at that. The book also depicts something of our human nature. It's like an MRI of our soul or our heart. What is going on inside of us that drives us to do and to respond the way that we do in life situations? When I think about Jonah in particular, as I've thought about that more this week, I think about 3 S's. And I think about there's this issue for Jonah of sovereignty. What we've seen in Jonah chapter 1 particularly, and him even trying to come to grips with this in chapter 2 is, I just don't like the way you're running the universe. It's not fair. Sometimes good happens out there and it's not rewarded. And sometimes people do what's wrong and that just seems to go unscathed, or you're gonna provide mercy for them. I just don't think what you're doing is right and fair. I think of this issue of sovereignty. It's kind of a big picture thing, and this really bothers Jonah. And then the second S has to do with satisfaction, and it's something along this line. If I can't have the world be the way I think it ought to be, and if you can't run it the way I think you ought to run it, then I'm taking my football home, and I'm just going to sort of pull back into my own little world, and I'm going to live for myself. My comfort, my satisfaction, my ease. We'll see that particularly in Jonah chapter 4. And then the third S that strikes me from this book is his stubborn determination to have it his way. He is willing to go head to head, toe to toe with God about both of these things. And he's even willing to continue to the point of suicide rather than yield either of these things to God. Either kind of the big picture sovereignty to let God run the universe how he sees fit, Or on the smaller scale, in my daily life, when things don't go the way I want to, instead of getting upset about that, maybe God is trying to do something in me. So with that overview, let's look at our in Jonah chapter 1, we've seen God, the divine disruptor. And I'm grateful to John Eldridge, who his 4 depictions of God in here. As I've related more to the part about man, the I know better, the egotistical eye roller. There's something in that for all of us. God tells us to do something, and we know we're supposed to do something that's right, and we just sort of go, oh, I don't want to do that. There's something in there. Jonah chapter 2, the benevolent boxer, where God goes toe-to-toe inside the belly of the great fish. And man, you see here, defiant, I am not giving up. He finally does sort of give up. And I think of Jonah here as the miserable moper. I don't like the world I'm in, but I guess I have no choice but to sort of join it. And so at that low threshold, then the fish vomits Jonah back out, and Jonah finds himself on a deserted beach, a Mediterranean beach, in a puddle of whale vomit, which is where we come to Jonah chapter 3. And here, what I think of God here is God, the persistent pursuer. He is persistently pursuing both Jonah and the Ninevites, as we'll see. And what do we see about Jonah here? What I relate to here is sort of the grumbling griper. He's not outwardly telling the people about this, but there's just this dialogue going on inside of him of just, I don't like what's happening. I don't think this is right. And he just has this critical, negative edge bent of just something's wrong and I don't like it. Taking my football home. All right, so Jonah chapter 3, verse 1. Now the word of the Lord came to Jonah the second time, which is very encouraging for you and I that disobey God, that God does this. Arise, go to Nineveh, the great city, and proclaim to it the message which I am going to give you. And so rather than God writing Jonah off and saying, just go home. You're just a mess. Go home, get yourself fixed. I'll get some other prophet to do this. God amazingly says, he comes back to Jonah. I mean, maybe there wasn't anybody on the bench. I don't know. Verse 3, Jonah obeyed the word of the Lord and went to Nineveh. Nineveh was a very large city. It took 3 days to go all through it. Now, I mentioned a couple weeks ago that one of the interesting things about this book and sort of what happens when we go our own way and what does God do. There's a preacher probably about 80 years ago that had a great way of thinking about this. He said, when we disobey God, we never get where we want to be, and we pick up the fare. We pick up the tab. But when we go God's way, he gets us to where we're supposed to be, and he picks up the tab. I think that's really illustrated here in this particular story as Jonah finally gets back to Nineveh. Verse 4, Jonah started into the city going a day's journey, and he proclaimed 40 more days, and Nineveh will be destroyed. Now, in the English translation of the Hebrew, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 words. That's what Jonah records of his message. Probably didn't take him a lot of time to put that together. He wasn't in his garage having to practice this with his dryer or his refrigerator, as some do. In the Hebrew, this message is only 5 words. And as you look at that 40 more days and Nineveh will be destroyed, it's not really a message of hope. And so we're sort of left to wonder, did Jonah have more to say? Or maybe he didn't. Maybe this is as grudging as he's going to do. He's going to, what's the minimum I can do to do this? Now, to be fair to Jonah, if you've been following the news, imagine a few months ago that if God had come to you and said, I want you to go to Kabul, Afghanistan. You know where that airport is? And I want you to go to the Taliban who are encircling the airport and coming out of the mountains. And I want you to go to the Taliban and say, 40 more days and the Taliban will be destroyed. Well, that would be a tough assignment to carry out. That might be your last assignment to carry out here on planet Earth. And yet Jonah goes and he gives this message. Well, in verse 5, then the people of Nineveh believed in God. I don't think Jonah saw this coming at all. He was shocked. Yeah, what does it mean to believe in God? When I was growing up, I erroneously thought that what that meant was I believed that God existed. I believe God. I believe in God, meaning I believe that God existed. Now, it had nothing to do with my daily life. When my family, my mom and dad took me to church, I was kind of glad I was there. But as soon as we left, I was also glad we left. And I didn't really think about anything to do with God or the things of God all the rest of the week until the following Sunday morning, when as I was just waking up, I was hoping that my parents would oversleep. Most of the time they did not. And I just assumed until I was in college that that was sufficient. I believed that God existed. That was, when I was born in America. I go to church. What else could it mean? Until about 10 minutes before I actually became a Christian my junior year in college, and it struck me, just because a chair is sitting in a sanctuary does not make it a chair.
Or Christian.
Or Christian. Oh, yes, thank you. Thank you. Maybe I should have spent a little more time speaking to my refrigerator in my garage. Yes, thank you. And over the course of the next 10 minutes, I was just sort of dumbfounded by this, and I thought, I don't think believing in God is what I think it is. Now, these folks here were not like I was growing up. Something very, very different happened with their belief. Jonah 3:5, the people of Nineveh believed in God, and they called a fast and put on sackcloth from the greatest to the least of them. So here the idea is they had a fast, meaning that they deprived themselves of food and drink for a while. Now, why would you do that? Well, the Bible says that fasting is one of those things that heightens your spiritual awareness. And as you are hungry or thirsty in a physical sense, you become hungry or thirsty in a spiritual sense. To want to be more of God's person or God's man or woman or more obedient, fasting is a good thing to do. Second, it says, and they put on sackcloth from the greatest to the least of them. And sackcloth is a picture of sort of despair or, oh my gosh, what has happened? This is terrible. Doom is about to happen. What's going on here? Well, part of what believing in God is that they were taking God seriously. They weren't just tipping his hat to God, just saying, okay, I believe God. Okay, Jonah, we'll go with your God if that's how it is. That's not what they're doing. They're taking God seriously. Verse 6, when the word reached the king of Nineveh, he arose from his throne, laid aside his robe from him, covered himself with sackcloth, just like the people did, and sat down in the dust. And dust or sitting in ashes is the same kind of sort of a symbol of lament. Oh my gosh, what has happened? What have I done? What have we done as a people? Then the king issued a proclamation. In Nineveh, by the decree of the king and his nobles, do not let man, beast, herd, or flock taste a thing. Do not let them eat or drink water. Verse 8, but both man and beast must be covered with sackcloth, and let men call on God earnestly, that each may turn from his wicked way and from the violence which is in his hand. Now, what the king realizes here is that if what Jonah is saying is true, it probably is true, it resonates, that punishment is deserved. And if God decides to do this, who are we to argue? This is what we have brought upon ourselves. Verse 9, who knows? The king continues, God may relent and with compassion turn his fierce anger so that we will not perish. And here what the king also sees in Jonah's message is the possibility of hope. God didn't have to send Jonah to give this message at all. It could have judgment just could have fallen. But instead there's sort of this last ditch, Hail Mary, so to speak. And the king seizes the moment and sees we need to act quickly. In these two things, I think of the people. What does it mean to believe God? They take sin seriously and they take God seriously. Both of these things, there's something, not just for me on Sunday morning when I was a kid, but all through the week. How am I to live? What am I to do? Verse 10, when God saw what they did and how they turned from their evil ways, he had compassion and did not bring upon them the destruction he had threatened. Well, that's Jonah chapter 3. And we come to the climax, so to speak, of Jonah 4, although it's sort of the anti-climax in a sense as we look at the story. What do we learn about God? Well, we learn that God is a long-suffering lover, and he is a very, very long-suffering lover with Jonah, far more than we would have been. And then what do we learn about man? Well, when I think about Jonah here, what resonates with me personally, this is just a personal word, is the petty petulant. I'm always amazed at how petty I can be in my head. Maybe you all don't relate to this, but I was going to Ralph's yesterday to get some candy for our fall fest, and it's a 5-minute drive. And on the way to Ralph's, I was complaining because somebody in front of me driving there was driving too slow. When I got to Ralph's, I wanted to go to the checkout line, and I was kind of in a hurry because I had forgotten to get something and wanted to get over here to help out. And Ralph's was packed with people. And there was a long line for the self-checkout thing, and I looked down there. There were long lines for all the checkers, except for the 10 items or less. And so I scooted on down to the 10 items or less. Now, guess what yours truly did next? I counted the number of items in the carts in front of me. And I saw the fellow in front of me had not 10, but 12. I was a little miffed. I wasn't sure if I should say something. I decided not to. When it was time to drive over here, or when I got out to the parking lot, I had a little bit of a time getting out of the parking lot because there was a fellow in a pickup truck who was backing up his pickup truck into a compact space. Is there anybody that relates to me here? I was annoyed. And on the way over to church, I had the opposite problem of going to Ralph's. I was irritated because a couple guys were driving too fast. Petty. The petty petulant. This is not how it's supposed to be. These people are not following the rules. What?
And you're missing a boot.
Yeah, there you go. And I was missing a boot. Yes, apparently I was not too petty about my boots last night. Okay. Jonah was greatly displeased, became angry. Now, why was he angry? Was he angry because, God, this was an impossible situation. Why would you send any prophet to Assyria? These wicked people that cut the babies out of pregnant women, that take people into slavery, that overcome, that are just cruel. But that's not why Jonah didn't go to Nineveh. It wasn't because it was impossible. Well, maybe it was dangerous, like going to the Taliban, Kabul. Well, we have no indication that was what kept him from going either, not the danger. We finally have it from his mouth in verse 2. He prayed, "Oh Lord, is this not what I said when I was still at home? That is why I was so quick to flee to Tarshish. I knew that you are a gracious and compassionate God, slow to anger and abounding in love, a God who relents from sending calamity." And there are three things that strike me here, and strike me personally. They may not strike you, but he complains about the way that God seems to be being sovereign about this world. I know what you're going to do. These evil people deserve punishment, and you're going to let them off. And I hate living in a world like this that's not predictable. And it's not right, and it's not fair. And then the second thing, besides complaint, is he accuses God of not being fair, not being giving punishment, not being just. He complains, he accuses, and the third thing is he rationalizes, "This is why I disobeyed you." Meaning, come on, give me a break. I didn't really need to go, and you know it. Verse 4, "Now, O Lord, take away my life, for it is better for me to die than to live." Now, before when I think about Jonah here and sort of this petty, petulant, there's part of me that resonates with him, and then part of me that resonates with another part of him. And I'm thinking about September 11th and that awful day when about 9 o'clock in the morning, many people our time turned on the news and watched two planes go into the Trade Center, the Twin Towers. And we've all seen video footage of that many, many times and watched with horror as this happened, both on the ground and people jumping out of the building, and this horrendous fire going on and the crashing of the... But the image that it was hardest for me to get out of my mind was some video from the Middle East, where there were some Middle Easterners watching this, and when the planes went into the Twin Towers, they began cheering. Yeah, 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 kind of that justice. America's finally get what it's deserved. And I remember looking at that and just being completely revolted. I wanted to throw up. Now, there's something, I think, here with Jonah as he looks at the same kind of situation. Verse 3, now, O Lord, take away my life, for it is better for me to die than to live. I'm sick and tired of living in a world where sometimes good is punished and where bad goes through and where life is just not fair. I'm sick and tired of this. I don't understand it. You don't explain yourself enough. I'm done, is where he comes to this point. Now, how would you respond if this was your prophet and your God? Jonah, have a seat. You need a lesson on theology. Let's talk about sovereignty and the great purpose of God or redemption. Well, he doesn't do that. He doesn't give him a spanking. He doesn't send him home. He doesn't say, go back and send somebody else. God becomes very personal at this point with Jonah. And he asks him a rhetorical question. Verse 4. Have you any right to be angry? Now, what he's angry about is what we're calling sovereignty. God's rule of the world and how things play out in the mystery of life. Have you any right to be angry? Now, Jonah does not tell us what he said to God. Jonah just continues the story, verse 5. Jonah went out and sat down at a place east of the city. There he made himself a shelter, sat in its shade, and waited to see what would happen to the city. Now, what was he waiting to see what would happen with the city? Well, I imagine that as he gave this message to the people, he was there apparently 3 days, and then he leaves. The repentance just didn't happen immediately. So it's going on through the city. It's rippling through. It finally gets up to the king. The king makes this announcement. So when Jonah goes outside the city, I think what he's hoping for is that the people are going to say, who is that idiot? Get him out of here. And he's waiting to see for the 40 days to happen and for judgment, sort of like Abraham saw Sodom and Gomorrah. Verse 6. Then the Lord provided a vine and made it grow up over Jonah and give shade for its head to ease its discomfort. Jonah was very happy about the vine. Now, I remember as a young Christian, a lot of times I heard Philippians 4:19 quoted. My God will supply every need of yours according to his glorious riches in Christ Jesus. And it's a great promise. And I have stood on that promise many, many, many times in my adult life. But I don't ever remember thinking about a testimony of God's provision by the next two things that God's going to provide, which is a worm and the equivalent of Santa Ana's on a very hot day. The first thing God provides here is this shade plant. Made it to grow to give shade for his head, to ease his discomfort, and Jonah was very happy about the vine. He's not the griping grumbler, and he's not the miserable moper. He's not the petty petulant. His whole mood changes. Why? Because of this thing that we're calling satisfaction. Maybe the big world, the big picture of the world isn't what I want it to be. Okay, fine. But at least in my little world, God, can't you at least provide something of comfort and ease and make my life a little bit easier here? And God says, no, not going to do that. Verse 7. At dawn the next day, God provided a worm, which chewed the vine so that it withered. Verse 8, when the sun rose, God provided a scorching east wind, and the sun blazed on Jonah's head so that he grew faint. He wanted to die and said, it would be better for me to die than to live. Now, why? How does he come to this point? Well, it appears to me, as of this week, that these two big S's that we're talking about, that in the world of sovereignty, I just don't like the way you're doing this. It's not fair. It's not right. It's not just. It's not predictable. I'm out of control. I hate living in this world if that's how you're going to run it. I'd rather just check out. Second thing, if that's the way the world's going to be, then in terms of my satisfaction, surely you can help us to be more comfortable and at ease and do something in my day-to-day life to make this life, which sometimes is very painful, not so hard. And God says, not right now. Nope. There's something else that needs to be exposed, and it's these two S's. And as we'll see, a third S. God said to Jonah, do you have a right to be angry about the vine? Again, a rhetorical question. But this time Jonah answers, I do. I'll go toe-to-toe with you on this. I do have a right to be angry enough to die. And what you see here at the end of Jonah is our third S. Sovereignty, satisfaction, and a stubbornness. A stubborn determination. I am going to have life the way I want it, and I'm going to have my daily life the way I want it, and you better cooperate. And if you don't, I'm done. Which is where Jonah comes. The Lord said, you have been concerned, and I think this is one of the most important words in the book of Jonah. You have been concerned, you've been caught up with, you have valued as your highest value about this vine, though you did not tend it or make it grow, it sprang up overnight and died overnight. It is a lesser thing. But Nineveh has more than 120,000 people who cannot tell their right hand from their left, and many cattle as well. Should I not be, same word, concerned, highest value, most important, priority, about that great city, all those people? And there is the distinction between God and Jonah. You might say, well, Seth, isn't Jonah just being human? Doesn't this just come to us naturally? And those two questions illustrate the point. That's my problem. It does come to us naturally. We do think that's what it means to be human. We just sort of, oh, well. Folks, when I come to church on Sunday, I don't come to church on Sunday just because I'm the pastor or just to pick up a few little nuggets or tips on how to make my life better. I come to church because I continue to need an overhaul. Just like Jonah. And I've been in need of an overhaul for a long time and continue to be in need of an overhaul. Part of that happens when we sing, like this morning, which was just spectacular. Part of that was last night, walking around and watching our folks at work serving the community. This is what Jonah needs. There is no Jonah chapter 5. And that gives me some hope that God is not done with Jonah and he's not done with you or me. Let's pray together. Father, we do need, until we can see clearly that there is something is fundamentally flawed with our nature, we will continue to be frustrated and gripers and mopers and doubters and questioners, and we'll just continue to withdraw into our own little lives as if they're the most important thing. We do need an overhaul. Help us to see in this book of Jonah what you want us to see about us. And help us to see also that you are the persistent pursuer of who we are. And especially in chapter 4, the long-suffering lover that continues to relate to us day after day after day, even when we're a mess and even in our mess. We thank you for Jesus Christ, our only hope of our actual nature actually slowly being changed to reflect something of him. And that is why we are here today. That's why we worship. What you've begun in us, you've promised to complete.